What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stucky.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. I'm your host, Roberto Arguello, and I'm excited to break down this week's BMW Championship from Castle Pines Golf Club in Castle Rock, Colorado. This week, PGA Tour is playing some mountain golf for really the first time on tour the whole season. They played at the Barracuda Championship in the Lake Tahoe area, but that was an opposite field event opposite the Open Championship. So this is the first time we can see the big dogs on the PGA Tour out in the Rockies. It should be a fun week, and I'm very excited to break it down with Spencer Aguiar, whom you can find on Twitter or X at Teeoff Sports. And we're excited to have Nick Breckwich back with us this week, whom you can find on Twitter/X at Sticks Picks. That's Sticks with an X. Nick, you've hit on a couple guys recently, Aaron Rye, Johnny Vegas. Spencer, you got back into the winner's circle last week with the Hideki Matsuyama pick. So Spencer, I'll sling it to you first. What is your best bet for the 2024 BMW Championship?
I think there's probably a few different ways that you can play this wager, whether it's the fade route of the golfer I'm taking on or the player that I'm backing here. I'm going to go with Adam Hadwin. You can find that between -110 and -115 over Cameron Davis. I wouldn't necessarily, if you care, if you were fading Davis, I think you can go JT Post and Eric Cole. If you're backing Adam Hadwin, you can also go towards this Steven Yeager sort of a route. These are things that we can get into deeper in the show, but I will go with Adam Hadwin -110 over Cameron Davis for this section today.
All right. So you're fading the Aussie. Nick, who or what is your best bet for the BMW Championship this week?
I'm riding the guy I've been talking about since the beginning of the year at even money. I'm going Justin Thomas top 20.
All right. Going with JT top 20. For my best bet, I'm going to go into the low Australian market. I'm going to back not Spencer's guy, Jason Day, not Cam Davis, who he's fading. I am going to back Adam Scott, one of the few golfers who's actually played a tournament on this golf course before, way back when it was the International in the early to mid 2000s. But before we get into the low Australian handicap, Spencer, why are you fading a different Australian in Cameron Davis by backing the man from Moose Jaw, Canada, Adam Hadwin?
I know Davis has been known as someone who tends to use his driving to find an advantage over the field. I think there's a lot of unknowns. We'll talk about that when we get to the course breakdown in a second. But when I looked at Castle Pines and I tried to run numbers for this, I saw a facility that featured 10 holes with water, multiple dog legs that are going to come into play. You add all that together in my model, I thought we got into this position here where this early support, and it's not a ton of it, but it's a little bit more than I would have expected for where Davis's current form is right now. Whether this is DFS inside of betting markets like this and other areas, there's just more garnering of support than I think he deserves. He ranked 49th in my model for strokes gained total when I ran it at direct comp courses. That's going to be things like Muirfield Village. He's also 48th lifetime at Nicholas tracks, so that also takes Muirfield into account. And then he was 41st in recent strokes gain when I just dove into any venue and didn't try to specifically weigh it for this course, just because of those unknown variables that we were talking about. There's going to be a little bit of a wider range of outcomes here, just because Davis does have that high-end potential with his irons. And if this can turn into one of those distance plus pitch and putt sort of a tournaments, there's upside to be found for him. But I think in a safer market like we're going to get here, I know Hadwin hasn't necessarily been the most we'll call him safe commodity on the boards most of these weeks. But anytime that I can get this course specific outlook, that gives me a player like Hadwin who starts catapulting in my sheet in a lot of different ways. And I will say this, it's not a direct comp, but if you look at the West Coast swing in general, and this is going to be more desert golf than mountain golf, but Hadwin's a great West Coast swing player. And if you throw him on some of these comp elevation courses that I ran, he also graded inside the top 15 of my model. So kind of how I talked about whether you want to fade Davis with him, Cole, Poston, you want to back Hadwin against what deems to be the bottom of my board and the Cameron Davises, the Steven Yeagers of the world. There's a lot of different ways to go about this wager. I'm just going to go with the Hadwin over Davis route here.
I like it. I was going to offer up a potential in-pod play on Adam Hadwin versus Steven Yeager, where Hadwin is -110 and Yeager is the low man on your sheet. 50 players in the field this week in the second of 3 FedEx Cup playoff events, and Yeager ranks exactly 50th in your sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and add that one on. Not the best bet of the week for me, but first in-pod play. Let's lock it in. Nick, why are you backing Justin Thomas this week in Colorado?
Yeah, love to hear Spencer kind of talk about the course comps and just overall the West swing. And this is kind of when I really started talking about Justin Thomas and the swing being back with a T3 to start the year at the American Express, T6 at the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, and T12 at the WM Phoenix Open, where we get some elevation out there. Overall, it's just ball striking. I know his off the tee game with the water, like that's going to be a little bit of a like the risk area with Justin Thomas. I do think that this is an event that I probably would be more inclined to bet him kind of on the ladder, the top 20, top 10, top 5, because I do think if all goes well for Justin Thomas, all will go very well for Justin Thomas. His short game, just to handle a Jack Nicklaus course, I know his finishes at Muirfield kind of leave a lot to be desired, but multiple top 40s there. I know that's not saying a whole lot, but going back to the West where he really found his season start off with a bang, and the approach game of late has been fantastic, especially on Saturday and Sunday. Yeah, it's the long iron play. Like that, this has been the best season of Justin Thomas's mid to long iron since we've seen in probably 3 to 4 years. Overall, I think this is a great fit for him. And honestly, I'm just worried about the off the tee game. He has gained strokes off the tee in 8 of the last 10. Outside that, it's been one of the more accurate driving seasons for Justin Thomas. How Justin Thomas finished at TPC Southwind, top 10 in strokes gained approach overall on Saturday and Sunday. Really love the momentum riding in here. And if there's anybody short game that I do trust to kind of save him when he does go wayward off the tee and has to kind of scramble to make par, it's going to be Justin Thomas.
I think it makes a ton of sense. His floor is going to be really high because of that short game and approach play, and the driver and putter going to be the big questions for Justin Thomas. And if he can get him to if he can figure those out, he can win on any given week. So watch out for JT this week. But going for my best bet, I am looking into the low Australian market. Have Adam Scott at +150 at our sponsor Bet365. Seen this as low as +130 in the market. I'd probably bet it down to +125, but there are only 3 golfers in this market, with the other 2 Australians being Jason Day, priced at +137 at Bet365, and also Cam Davis at +260. Spencer laid out why he wants to fade Cam Davis, which I won't get into too much, but his biggest strengths are short game and driving distance, and water is going to be an issue off the tee. If he's wayward, his short game advantage will be mitigated with all the sand and water around the green and the lack of tight lies. And also he's 49th out of the 50 players in this field in bogey avoidance. So I like the floor being a little bit lower for Cameron Davis than it might normally be. And Jason Day on a golf course, which we'll get into our course preview momentarily, which is going to be pretty similar, I think, on the approaches to Muirfield Village, where you're going to have a lot of water and other penalty areas cutting in angularly at diagonals on the greens, where the difference between a great shot and a ball that is taking a penalty stroke is not going to be a lot of distance. So guys are going to need to be very precise on their approaches. The greens are going to have a lot of undulation. They're going to be extremely fast at a 13 on the stimp meter, where if you're over the green, it's going to be really tough to pitch the ball close with the really long, thick rough as well. So Jason Day, dead last in this field in expected proximity, and he's really struggled with his irons at Muirfield Village in the past, even though he lives right there in Ohio. You would think it would be a home game. He'd have it all figured out. he doesn't like that golf course. And I think he's going to be similarly stymied on these approaches this week. Going back to Jack's Place, in his last 14 appearances, Jason Day has lost strokes 11 times with his irons. So I think that's going to be a big problem for him. And I wanted to back Adam Scott against both of these guys, whom I've identified as fade candidates in Day and Davis. Adam Scott, the driver is a huge asset for him. I think Spencer, driving and modeling that is going to be a really key part of the handicap. So I'm excited to break that down in the course preview shortly. But no matter how we model it, I like how Adam Scott is entering into this tournament with solid form with the driver. 3 of his 4 best weeks with the driver so far this season have come in his past 3 starts. And per Data Golf, this has been Scott's best year with the driver since 2017 in terms of true strokes gained per round. He has no real weakness in his game, whereas Day and Davis do have big weaknesses in their games. And so I like Adam Scott in this market at plus 150 for the low Australian at Bet365. We talked about the course preview. Very important this week with this tournament, the old Western Open, the BMW Championship being a rotational tournament, one of the few on the PGA Tour. And other great courses are in the rotation, including Olympia Fields, which you saw last year where Victor Hovland won. But we haven't seen this course on the PGA Tour in roughly 20 years. So brand new, very important to break down how we're modeling it. Spencer, I'll sling it to you. What did you weigh in your model this week?
You kind of just talked about it, Roberto, where you look at this facility and because of the unknown variables that we're not going to have an answer for until this is played. And even in fairness, once it is played, and if we come back to it, it's going to be a situation where I usually want 3, 4, 5 years of information before I actually start feeling comfortable for what a facility actually looks like year in and year out. You look here, and inside of my model, there were 2 really big factors that I wanted to see a player experience that would be a comp course outlook with it. Like, we can use the comp courses. I use Muirfield Village. I looked at Augusta National. You can look at these secondary places where, West Coast Swing, put it in Vegas, TPC Summerlin, Summit Club. If you want to go into some of these Arizona locations that Nick had talked about, like, there's different places to find elevation, but the 2 factors for me that were most important that I was trying to find in my model is, 1, how did somebody project in similar off the tee performances? So that's going to be golfers that have found success where they have elevation, golfers that are going to find success where there's 10 holes that water comes into play, golfers that can find success when there's dog legs and balls are going to have to be moved in certain directions. And then on the flip side of that answer, I wanted to see how somebody would putt on these really fast POA/bent greens where you just mentioned it, Roberto. It's 13 on the stint meter. It's going to be extremely fast. So you add all of that together, and I threw in Nicklaus courses. I threw in elevation. I did run an expected strokes gain for this tournament and this course of what I thought it would build as. And I just ran a very basic strokes gain of taking how a player's been playing if they're on any course, just because I don't want to tie my hands into this position to where I'm extrapolating out data that I don't know to be correct in a lot of these spots and finding myself in a position where I'm wrong. I think at its core of this venue, you're going to see this course that's 8,130 yards. You think bomb and gouge mentality. That is not necessarily how I built this model. Like, there are certain mathematical formulas out there of how you can try to calculate what elevation does. Most people are going to land in that like 7,400, 7,500 range of what this actually is. I would venture to say it's even less than that because of all the downhill lies that come into play and how speedy this can get. So when you look specifically, and these are not even necessarily golfers that I backed, these are just golfers that saw a really big expectation increase. And I'll name a couple of them. It's inside of my model if you wanted to look yourself. But these were some golfers that saw an expected increase off the tee at a specific course like this versus what you would get normally. So that's a golfer like Billy Horschel, who's in form right now. It's actually surprisingly Jason Day. I don't mind the Adam Scott ticket, Roberto. Like, to me, Cameron Davis is in a different league than those other 2. I think Scott's a really good play this week. I think Day is a good contrarian DFS option to consider, but there's also going to be a boomer bust nature because of what he's done at Muirfield Village in the past if we're using that as a direct comp. And it's actually Justin Thomas as the 3rd name that Nick just mentioned, to where he sees an increase in expected off the tee performance. So I weighed all of that together. I tried to figure out golfers that would be the best course specific fit while using comp and corollary trends rather than built-in statistical data, because we don't know at the end of the day if this turns into a bomb and gouge facility. I don't think it's going to, with the tree line nature and the water and the rough, and you're going to need to approach from within the fairways, I would think, because of how fast these greens are. But you never quite know what the answer is until you see it in motion. So I kind of just used what I knew about Nicklaus tracks, elevation, all of those answers, rolled it into one, got the model, and it left me with an outright betting card where I took 2 shots. I'm a little bit worried about the top, but found the value where we could, and we'll go from there.
Nick, anything else you'd like to add on the course preview?
Don't know a whole lot about it. Did the flyover stuff on YouTube. This course looks beautiful. I know there's a big drought going on in Colorado, so hope everybody's safe and everything like that. I've seen a lot of articles. Like, I read that you can't even smoke cigars on the courses out here, like near Castle Pines in that area, because like they're that scared of, obviously fire outbreak and everything like that. So that's kind of scary to read about and everything like that. Hope everybody's safe out there, but I'm excited to see this thing on TV. I think this is going to be absolutely beautiful. Obviously the just everything about a Jack Nicklaus course, and then you add elevation and beautiful mountain backdrops like this. This is going to be awesome. I am very excited to watch this tournament. This is the lowest at risk I've ever had in the betting market. I don't even think that's because we don't know a whole lot about the course. I feel like usually that's like when I really lean on Spencer and his creativity. That is, I think, when he plays the best is when there's not a ton of data, despite what he says, like wanting more data. But no, I'm really excited. I'm excited to go through my betting card outside of Justin Thomas. I think I'll have one very chalky play and then one play that I can't seem to figure out why no one wants him at this number. So I'm excited to hear you guys if you want to guess that. Otherwise, I'm good to go. I'm really excited just to watch this one on TV.
My guess is Sahith Theegala.
Shorter, way up the board.
Oh, okay. Spencer, do you have a guess?
I'll say Oberg.
No, everybody loves Oberg, and I get it. I'm worried about. I'm valuing around the green a little bit more than most, if not a lot more than most, I think.
Can I guess again, just because I feel like it's very on brand for us? Is it Rory?
It's Rory, absolutely. 14-1 on Rory McIlroy, and no one wants to talk about him. I know he was terrible last week. Coming back from the Olympics, I think that matters a little bit, and he was so good out there too. It's like when he's on and his driver's accurate, obviously the distance just shows up when he puts a foot on the ground, but when his driver is accurate, his short game is so good. His irons have been obviously a mixed bag if you're pulling in like recent stroke scan approach, obviously outside of the Olympics, but the Open Championship, missing the cut. Like I think that this is a guy that missing a cut and potentially like bad form, I'm not worried about that. I think this is a week where no one's talking about him. The cameras are all going to be, about Xander and Scotty kind of racing down to Atlanta. Hideki getting off the schneid there, and then everybody's talking about Cantlay. I feel like every handicapper in the world thinks Ludwig should win this tournament, which would be awesome for him, but I just don't think that Rory should ever be 14-1, and I will do that this week for sure, especially if it does go to that bomb and gouge style course. If not, his short game has been, on par with Colin Morikawa's this year with how good his short game's been too. So let's go, Rory.
We can mute the section when I talk about Oberg in a minute here, because I'm
okay with it. I'm okay with it. I'm just saying, like, I try not to listen to a lot of shows before we do our show. Like Wednesday's my golf content consumption day, but I was listening to PGA Radio. Like, everybody's talking about Ludwig. This should be a perfect spot for him. I scroll through Twitter and I don't mute certain words before I make my card. I probably should. And everything's about Oberg this week. But yeah, I mean, Jack Nicklaus success. Where does Rory fit in your strokes gain Jack Nicklaus if you have all that data pulled, Spencer? Like top 3?
He is
Cantlay, him, and
sixth on Nicklaus. I ran it from a little shorter perspective though. With it, like if we think though of where Rory finds success, it's tree line fairways where he has the ability to use his driver as an advantage. And it's these kind of comp courses to where he is the number 1 expected comp course performer. I tend to agree with you. Like to me, when I built this, and I guess I'll get into my outright card very quickly, because it's 2 names at the top, near the top, and then there's one at the bottom of it. I was very afraid of Xander. Like, I don't love the price on Xander. It's one of those situations where I love the golfer. think we've reached this point now of no return of these numbers just not necessarily being bettable.
We're getting 5-1s on Xander. I absolutely love it.
Like Xander's become the new Scotty, and Scotty's become this hybrid version of Tiger Woods in somewhere that's probably not quite his prime and whatever this version is of himself. And we just keep seeing it in the market where the market is pushing both of those two players up. I like Xander a lot. I am very afraid that Xander wins this golf tournament. I'm not going to get there at the price, but when I built my numbers here, I was trying to find, like, we've had this back and forth conversation kind of between Schauffele and Morikawa all season, where the market massively keeps moving them in one direction or another. And I mentioned this at the US Open, where Morikawa ended up becoming, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 to 1 to win the US Open, which is a lower price than some of these 16s, 17s, and 18s that you can find this week. And a lot of that stemmed from his short game prowess and everything that he had created. But like, what I'm always trying to find in this market kind of comes down to two things. It's one, a golfer who hasn't had his value decreased past the point of being bet worthy. That's a good form golfer. That's Hideki last week. That's where Hideki landed on my card. Or two, it's the flip side of that answer of someone who's received a boost in the market because of a bad performance or two. That's Rory that you just talked about, Nick. That's Morikawa, of why I'm betting him at, I found them at 18.75 to 1 if you really shop around out there. But I thought anything like in that 16 to 1 range still had a ton of value. What it also is it's Oberg at 27 to 1. I have watched this number drift, and that was at Bet365 earlier today. And you can correct me, Roberto, if it's still there. I believe it is inside of the enhanced market. But you look at somebody like Oberg, 3 straight finishes outside of the top 15 on the leaderboard. That includes a missed cut at the Open Championship, a share of 40th last week in a 70-man field. I just want, for 1 second, everybody to ignore the second round of the Open and look at the data that he has thrown together from a ball striking profile. Because I know we have gone to this narrative that he has burnt out, he has hit a wall, the injury maybe is a problem in some regard, and we haven't really gotten clarity on that situation. But if you take the 9 additional rounds that he's played, he's averaged 1.16 strokes gained to the field ball striking. That's including a turnaround with the driver where he's gained in 3 straight rounds. And then an approach profile that has done most of the work to the tune of over 10 shots. If you look at that 1.16 strokes gain number, that's 0.10 shots better than the 2-year baseline that I have for him in my model. So, those are the worst results that we've gotten from him all season. We're actually getting better ball striking at the core of what this is. That would place him behind only Schauffele and Scheffler in terms of projected strokes gain data. And then there's also this 10-spot improvement over his baseline. I talked about driving for a second of where I'm trying to find the improvement. I'm also trying to find the improvement with somebody's putter on similar green complexes. And when you give me a name like Oberg, who all of a sudden jumps inside the top 12 in my model in expected putting, that's the Steven Yeager answer earlier in the year when he propelled up the sheet. That's Scotty when he picked up his first title early in the year. It's these names that are the ball striking savants that I can find that are getting an expected increase in putting that I'm usually most bullish on trying to back. I do like Nick's call with Rory. I think that's certainly a route to consider. It's a very good price based off of where this would have been with any semblance of form entering this week. And that's kind of where it's that out of sight, out of mind, bad form boost in the market where all these names make sense. And then the last name I took, I realize this is probably going a little bit deeper than I should down on the board. I did take Eric Cole at 125 to 1. I thought if you looked at the high upside markets, whether that's an outright, a top 10 wager, that makes a lot more sense than any of these DFS conversations we're going to have. He's going to be extremely popular for DFS. I would rather get my exposure to him in these high upside markets, hope that I'm correct with a top 10 sort of performance, and just hope that this elevation for him ends up helping a golfer that is not accurate off the tee. He's not long off the tee, but maybe some of these downhill lies and the elevation can actually create a better driving opportunity for him. So, it's an optimistic gamble that I'm taking there, but when this is not a bomb and gouge facility, according to my numbers, which is where it pushed me off of a lot of these really popular guys that are in the space, that are being bet in this space. That is like, I think Cole is at the bare minimum a name to consider in a high end market. Maybe you want to say top 10 instead of the win, but even at the low end here, if you want to just take a very cheap shot, 125 to 1 to round out a card was something that I was certainly fine doing.
Couple notes for you guys. Oberg is still available at 27 to 1 on Bet365 in the enhanced win market, and Rory McIlroy is up to 15 to 1 on Bet365's enhanced win market. So be sure to
I got to go back to the well.
I hadn't seen him above 12, 13 to 1 earlier. That's very enticing. I have started my card with Colin Morikawa at 16 to 1. Spencer, I think that I think all three of us bet Morikawa this year at the Memorial. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And we all got Scotty that week because he finished solo second to Scotty Scheffler. And I think that it's a recipe that's going to work. His game is a recipe that's going to work well here because you've got to hit the fairways. There are stiff missed fairway penalties, whether it's with the really long, thick rough or water or just being in the trees in the thick forest here at Castle Pine. So I think there's going to be a very stiff missed fairway penalty. I like that Morikawa's game has elite driving accuracy. No, he's not super long. But another thing that I think is really important that I failed to mention during the course preview part was this is a Nicklaus golf course. Jack Nicklaus likes to play his own golf courses. Jack Nicklaus moves the ball from left to right, basically exclusively. And so the landing areas are going to favor golfers who move the ball from left to right. And a lot of the greens are going to favor golfers who move the ball from left to right, especially because if you move the ball from left to right, if you're just a fader, no, if you're a lefty as well, you're going to have less spin on the ball. You're going to have more spin on the ball, and it's going to land a little bit more softly than if you have a little bit less spin on the ball, and it's going to land more softly than if you draw the ball with more spin. It's going to help them off the tee because of these left to right shaped shots that you're going to have to play. And I think that's very important. And that's something that I wanted to consider. It's a reason why I like Victor Hovland this week. I haven't bet him because he's come down so far. I think, Spencer, you bet him 40 to 1 last week at Memphis, and now he's in the 15, 16 to 1 range across the board. So it's frustrating that there wasn't an opportunity to bet him at a 25, 30 to 1 number this week. And obviously he won the Memorial last season at Jack's Place and has had a ton of success on that golf course at Muirfield Village. So I like Victor Hovland this week, but I think Colin Morikawa, because of his much better short game, is a better fit here. He's going to find more fairways. I can guarantee that, or he should find more fairways in theory. So the second golfer and the last golfer so far on my outright card is Sahith Theegala. You can find him at 50 to 1 out there. And I thought this was just buying the dip on a price that's gone too far for a golfer who has a ton of talent. The 35-yard wide fairways are going to be generous in certain spots. The misses, if you miss those, are going to be penal, which we discussed earlier. But I like Theegala because his driving accuracy has improved significantly from last year. He's still got tons of upside on approach, although right now he's been in a lull in approach play, which is why we're getting this generous price on him. He's lost with his irons in each of the last 4 tournaments, although he does have 2 top 6 finishes with a tie for 4th and a tie for 6th in that span. The tie for 6th came at the 3M Open. The tie for 4th came at the Genesis Scottish Open. So not against the best fields on the PGA Tour, but they still show that if he does get that high quality iron play this week, he can win absolutely in this field. He was a shorter price earlier this season to win the Masters, which we've discussed as a comp course because of the fiery greens, the big fairways with some significant misses being penalized, and then also the approaches into relatively big greens. He's got a great short game. It's been statistically not elite this year, been very average, but it's come on recently with him gaining shots around the green in 6 of his last 7 tournaments. And I think there's going to be some commonalities with around the green at Valhalla from earlier this year, where Theegala was pitching in from everywhere, even though he did lose strokes around the green that week. That's part of why I like Victor Hovland, because of that around the green. I think that's going to be a little bit easier for him, although we did see some really poor bunker play from Hovland last week. But anyways, back to Theegala. I thought he was a cheaper version of buying a Wyndham Clark this week, but at 50 to 1 versus now 25 to 1 with everybody in the world pouncing on Wyndham Clark this week. I really like Theegala's chances at this number to potentially win this week. And I think he's a little bit underrated overall with upside. So I think he could be a sneaky play for you, whether you want to play him in DFS or in the outright market. I like Theegala's chances this week. And he's, I presume, played some golf in the mountains, having grown up on the West Coast and played at Pepperdine for a few years. So I like Theegala at 50-1. I still have some room on the card, so I'm intrigued by Oberg, intrigued by Rory McIlroy at 15-1, but I think I'm going to save my bullets for in the tournament. I'm also, as I've noted, very intrigued by Victor Hovland. I also like Patrick Cantlay, a golfer who's played really well at the Memorial Tournament in the past at Muirfield Village. He's in the 20-1 range. I also like that he's rested, hasn't played a ton of golf over the summer, didn't play in the Olympics, and his game has been trending in the right direction. The driver was an issue for him earlier this season, but when he's hitting fairways, the rest of his game's complete. And we've noted on this show in the past that when he gets over 20-1, there's normally value on Patrick Cantlay historically. I think that's a play that could be, I think it's very accurately priced right now in the 18-20-1 range. If I can get some drift on him at 25-1, I think I'd rather have him than Oberg. But I'm going to wait for the price, and I'm not going to force it at 18-20-1. We'll love to hear y'all's thoughts on Cantlay, if you guys have any, or if you had to bet one. Early rapid fire question: would you rather have Cantlay or Hovland at, say, 18-1 each?
Cantlay for me. He's on my card. That will finish it for me. I have JT at 45-1, Rory 14. I did go a little over 1 unit at risk to fit Cantlay. I was between him and Morikawa, so I think I'm kind of right in line with your card a little bit here. I do love Hovland, but I just feel like he's just a little bit too popular for me in the short game that I'm valuing here. I'm going to fade him and would go to Morikawa if I did not have Cantlay already on the card. So Cantlay is my short answer that I made long.
Here's how I will answer the question. I'll try to keep it as short as I can possibly keep it. But if you look specifically at Hovland here, I like the golfer. I hate what has happened with the number. We are, Roberto, you and I joked off air about, and we've talked about it on the show with Wyndham Clark specifically, where nobody loved your Wyndham Clark play at the Olympics, and he ends up catapulting himself up the board. And now all of a sudden he's the most bet on commodity of the week. So there might be some apologies in store for you might have been ahead of the market on Wyndham Clark there. But what ends up happening in these spots with Clark and Hovland is we see one or two good tournaments. And I'm not keeping this short, by the way. I'm very well aware of that. But you get one or two good tournaments from them, and now all of a sudden Hovland's 18-20-1. Like, this is a much different bet at that price. So I would also rather bet Patrick Cantlay. You look at golfers that get a projected increase in driving. Cantlay is right below Justin Thomas on that list that I talked about. You look at comp courses, Muirfield Village, TPC Summerlin. I made this comment yesterday in one of my articles. It's almost as if Cantlay has become this new school version of Webb Simpson, where the courses that he plays well at, there's rollover predictability year after year. And I know we haven't actually seen this course in action, but when we want to talk about Jack Nicklaus designs and venues where he's found success, this does feel like a Patrick Cantlay venue with a golfer that is starting to turn the game closer to where we saw it probably at this time a year ago. So, I couldn't get there at the price, unfortunately, but Cantlay is an intriguing option this week.
Yeah, I think 20-1 is very fair. I might bet him just to win 5 units instead of 7 at 20 if I don't find any drift tomorrow. But I am keeping a very close eye on him as the top golfer I do not have on my card currently. Gentlemen, have we gone through all of our outright bets? I wanted to get into one and done, if so.
Yeah, I've gone through every bet that I have on the card. It's going to be a very low exposure week for me.
All right. Before we get into one and done, a reminder that Links and Locks is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. Gentlemen, I think for the first time, maybe all season, I am outside the money. Top 3 get paid. And also, if you make the most cuts, you get a share of 5%. Spencer has locked in his 1.67%. Congratulations to him rolling in the dough over there. But Nick is in second. I was passed as believe it was Josh Golden who hit on Hideki last week. So he moved up ahead of me into third. And our venerable leader, Michael Lieboff, is still in first. I noted in the one and done discussion last week that I had Hideki Matsuyama as my play. I pulled him out because I saw a couple of guys ahead of me, had him available. And I played Corey Connors, who did absolutely nothing for me. If I played Hideki Matsuyama, I'd be in first. And now I'm out of the money. So I still have Hideki Matsuyama available. I am also in a spot where I know that people ahead of me, Golden doesn't have Hovland or Wyndham Clark. I think Lieboff and Nick, one of them has Wyndham Clark available. The other one has Hovland available. So I'm assuming they're both going to play those guys.
I have Wyndham. I'm going Cantlay. I'll let you know now. Locked and loaded.
I like that play.
I'm okay with second. I'll kiss the sister, whatever they say about second place. Maybe that's a tie. I don't know, but I don't know. I'm going with Cantlay. I'll mute.
I like the Cantlay play. I think I'm leaning toward Hovland at this point. He's the shortest on the odds board that I have available. I like the left to right. I think he's going to have a relatively high floor because he's an underrated. His driving accuracy is underrated. I think that's going to play really well at this course. And so I'm leaning toward Hovland, but Wyndham Clark is intriguing as well. I need to get at least $200,000 ahead of third place, who does not have Hovland available. And I like my chances with him. So I'm going both for the floor and the upside. I think I'm leaning Hovland. Spencer, any one and done thoughts for this week?
Here's what I'll say about Wyndham Clark. I'd be curious to get Nick's thoughts on this also. To me, Wyndham is going to end up being the trap of the week for numerous reasons of how I built my model. And he's going to be one of the most popular one and done picks because I think a lot of people, I have him available too, Roberto. Like you and I both land under that mindset. And I guess even Nick, where Wyndham got saved for far too long with maybe the idea of wanting to use him here. And then the more that I started running numbers for this tournament, some of these concerns have really started to ramp up. There's a very specific outlook for him where he finds success, be very long off the tee, get into your short iron proximity range and make putts. Doesn't mean you can't find success, but there are golfers like Victor Hovland, like you mentioned, Patrick Cantlay, like Nick talked about, where I would rather play those names at less ownership for a one and done build and kind of try to be aggressive in that sense. I think it's going to be, we'll call it a finish that lands outside of the top 5 for Wyndham Clark. That's going to be my prediction on this show here. I don't really have anybody available. I've been talking about this for what feels like 3 months now, so I don't know what has happened to my players. And funny enough, I've actually started to make a push up the leaderboard with the Robert McIntyres at the Scottish Open and Hideki Matsuyama last week. It's a little too late, but I think I have 2 players that are inside of the top 22, give or take, in of the choices that I have on like inside of, I don't know if they're running it from the FedEx Cup or World Rankings on it. I think it's World Rankings, but I think I have like 2 of the top 22. I'll probably go Sam Burns for that reason, just because it's him or Jason Day. So I'll shoot for the upside that I have on Burns. But if I had a clean pick here of what I could do, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. If you have a clean pick, you're going to use the player that's the high-end name. There's very few tournaments left. That would be my advice. Don't leave options on the board. But yeah, I mean, it's now or never for most of these contests.
All right, gentlemen. Any other plays that you guys have on your cards this week?
No.
All right, let's run into rapid fire. On Bet365 Enhanced Win, that's where we're going to find the odds that we're using during this segment. Scotty Scheffler is plus 370. Xander Schauffele is plus 650. Nick, if you had to bet on one of those two heavy favorites, which one would it be?
It would be Xander.
Spencer?
I don't think the Xander price is as far off as it may look on the surface. Like if 8.5, 9-1 would have been out there, there's a much different buy-in point. But there have been 3 times this year, I believe, where Xander has ranked in front of Scotty in my model. 2 of those are major championships where he won the tournament. The third one, I believe, is also the US Open, where he finished better than Scotty there. This would be the next outcome where he was above Scotty, and that's a really rare answer to give. I like Xander a lot this week.
I agree with you guys. I would take Xander as well. Moving along, we talked about Rory and Colin Morikawa. They're both 15-1. We also talked about Patrick Cantlay. Let's talk about Hideki Matsuyama. He's 20-1. Victor Hovland is 20-1. Nick, I'll sling it back to you. If you had to bet one of those two guys, who would you pick?
Victor.
Spencer?
I'll go with Victor for any of those Valhalla comps that we've talked about and just his ability for total driving. He's like a legitimate top 6 win equity candidate in my model from a pure upside perspective. There's safety concerns if you put them in a matchup together, but for upside, Victor Hovland.
Normally, if you bet the over-under on amount of time it would take us to talk about Tony Finau, you could cash the under every single week on this podcast, but not until this week. You got to cash the over because nobody's talked about him at all until now. He is 27-1. Tommy Fleetwood is also 27-1. Nick, I know you bet on these guys a few times this year. Among the guys you can't quit, if I gave you a free $100 to put on either of them, which one would you take?
Just my 2 options?
Yes.
Can I pass for Spencer?
Yes.
I learned my lesson last week, Roberto, fading Tony Finau in a matchup. I took Corey Connors. That didn't even necessarily go wrong with the Finau fade. It just went really wrong with the
You
backing
faded
of...
Finau. That's what's wrong. I mean, gosh, I'm trying to look at how many cards I've bet him on. It's disgusting. And if you want to pull elevation, of course, Mexico City and his history there and the Utah guy, like, I mean,
The narratives.
I got us. At least I'll go with Finau after rudely interrupting Spencer, but because now this is the time I actually don't lose money doing it. But if he wins, I'm done. I'm going to be heartbroken for a long, long time.
I'll say Fleetwood for me, but Finau's recent trending form is putting him like of a lot of these names that are popular bet on options this week. To me, Finau and Hovland, like those two specifically, forget price for a second, are the most realistic moves of like, I understand why people are backing them. Couldn't get there at the number, and I will take Tommy Fleetwood. So, I mean, he doesn't win on the PGA Tour, so take that for what it's worth. But I kind of like Fleetwood this week. The problem is, what is his true upside if he doesn't win golf tournaments?
100%. But the putter has been showing some signs of life recently. He's gained strokes putting in each of his last 6 tournaments, and he has 5 top 16 finishes in that span. Approach play has been sublime. I'm going to lose my mind if he wins this week and I don't bet him. So somebody at home, you should probably bet on him because we're not on him. It's going to happen. Moving along, we talked about Wyndham Clark. Sam Burns is 35-1. Russell Henley is 37-1. Billy Horschel, whom Spencer likes this week, is also 37-1. And Aaron Rye is 45-1. Nick, if I gave you one of those 4 guys, Burns, Henley, Horschel, or Rye, which one would you take in the outright market?
I truly believe in the form change for Billy Horschel. He was very vocal about it last year in his struggles, and I think that's a swing that once it's locked in is very, very repeatable. You could see it week after week with the strokes gained, ball striking in general. Obviously, the distance really isn't there, but he does have the win that I believe we were all on that week at Muirfield a couple of years ago. His long irons are great. I'm just going to make this one simple. I think his swing is extremely repeatable right now. He's in a good place. I'm going to go with Billy Horschel.
Spencer?
I will say Sam Burns. I do like Billy Horschel. We've seen Horschel in the past when he gets hot, and we've seen it specifically during the playoff run here. He can string results together. Nick talked about Justin Thomas when he almost took down an event earlier in the year. Well, the real winner of that event probably should have been Sam Burns, who also went south very quickly there. Form looks good for Burns. He can get himself into some trouble off the tee. the approach numbers leave a little bit to be desired. But I guess I'd be most inclined to either bet on the form with Horschel or Burns, and I'll go with Burns here.
Burns is one of the guys who just missed my card last week, who after a round or two, I was very upset that I didn't bet him. Numbers not nearly what it was last week. I think in the 70-1 range, 65. Now he's 35-1. So I think he's very appropriately priced, but I'll lean with Nick here on Billy Ho, and just his heaters run white hot. Although I do like Burns, and very intrigued to see how he plays next week at the newly renovated East Lake, with Burns being 18th in the FXCAT standings, overwhelmingly likely to make it to East Lake next week. Moving along down the board in the 50-1 range, Corey Connors is 50-1. We've already touched on JT, so we'll skip him. Sungjae Im is also 50-1. Cameron Young is 50-1. And Jason Day also 50-1. So Connors, Im, Young, and Day all 50-1. Nick, if you had to bet one of those guys outright, which one would you take?
Sunjay. Only guy's short game I believe in the long irons. Just, he's a mixed bag. I thought he was a perfect fit last week and didn't really do anything.
I am very out on Connors and Young. I will give the same answer of Sungjae.
I think that's kind of what it was. Roberto was like survival of the fittest. I was more out on the others than I am in on Sunjay, if that helps.
That makes sense. Moving along, Akshay Bhatia is 55-1. Shane Lowry is 60-1. Adam Scott is 60-1. And Davis Thompson is 65-1. Among Bhatia, Lowry, Scott, and Thompson, Nick, which outright intrigues you the most?
Give me Adam Scott due to the course history 30 years ago. And because of the elevation and what it could do to a Shane Lowry hangover, may not be pretty.
Spencer?
I think Scott would be my second choice. Kind of like I talked about in the beginning, Roberto. I like Adam Scott this week. There's a lot of different ways to consider him. I will actually, though, bet on, we'll call it some of the youth unknown with Davis Thompson. I've been a very big proponent, and so has Nick. It feels like, I mean, I guess maybe even Nick more so. We were in a fantasy league together, a season-long league where Nick actually drafted him before I could get to him. But Davis Thompson is a legitimate premier ball striker, former #1 amateur in the world. We have seen him this year put the results together. I would venture to say that if we're talking about players in my model, he's a top 25 golfer in the world, pretty much any way that I run the data.
Just elite driver of the golf ball, too.
Yes.
I'm going to say, this feels like a course where driver's going to be in hand all day.
Yep.
I failed to mention earlier, the par four. So there are no holes on this golf course between 255 yards and 430 yards. Every single par four is at least 430 yards on the scorecard. Every par three is between 200 yards and 255 yards on the scorecard. So going to be a lot of longer irons. Of course, you're taking off, let's say 2% of the distance for every 10,000 yards, or for every 1,000 yards. And so a 200-yard shot might be playing around, 10% for every 1,000 yards. So a 200-yard shot is going to be playing maybe 180 if it's flat. And a lot of these par threes are downhill. So you're going to have some length, and then you're going to be hitting a bunch of drivers off the tee unless you're laying up in front of a hazard or some bunkers. I think Davis Thompson's going to have a chance to rise up the board. I didn't necessarily want to bet him in the outright market this week, but I think if there were more players in the field, a top 5, top 10 might have been a great way to bet him. Maybe contrarian DFS is also intriguing, and I felt similarly about Adam Scott. So a few guys in this range that I really like, and Akshay Bhatia's got some upside with the irons, but he hasn't been in the best form recently. Could be a nice sleeper play. So a lot of guys that intrigue me in this range right now. But moving along to 65-1s, Christian Bezuidenhout, who got the full winning money at the Amex, which we mentioned earlier this year. He's 65-1. Matt Fitzpatrick, the Englishman, has been in some rough form. He's 65-1. Robert McIntyre is 75-1. And Nick Dunlap, who snuck in as the 50th golfer in this field. Congrats to him for making it into all of the signature events next season. Would have been a shame if he didn't make it there, because he didn't get the points from the Amex because he wasn't a member. So even despite that lack of reward for his win, on top of not getting paid on top of it, he made it into the top 50, and he'll get a lot of money next year as a result of that in those no cut events. So, guys, to recap, Buzz Eisenhout 65-1, Fitzpatrick 65-1, McIntyre 75-1, and Nick Dunlap is 75-1. Nick, if you had to choose an outright among those guys, who would you pick? Who'd you take?
I mean, it's all like obviously Bobby Mack has a lot of win equity. Dunlop did it at a absolute birdie fest, and like really just flashed that whole week. I mean, it's like Bez is out. I'm not betting him. He could be 150-1. I don't think I'm done playing the Bez game. I think if you're playing a DFS cash game, sure, lock him in. You can enjoy his 27th place finish. I'm gonna go with Fitz. It just seems like a very large number. I think his swing is a long ways away from where it could be to get back to like winning form. But if it's a putter, obviously Bobby Mack's putter just catches fire too. But Fitz did gain strokes, ball striking last week, or right there, even to the field, I guess. But the approach game was there. The long irons is something I usually like with him. That's kind of like the only upside of his game all season has been those long irons. So for 65-1 and a high pedigree player, I'll pick Fitz.
Yeah, I probably will give the same answer. I know Nick and I have given a lot of same answers here. Like I'm out on Nick Dunlap. I think it's wild the support that he is garnering in the space. I saw him as one of the most bet on players. Not going to be for me. Think McIntyre is a boom or bust commodity to where like that would probably be the 1B choice if I was to give a second name. My model loves Bezadenhout. There is, as Nick said, very little belief in the win equity that he possesses when he comes T14 in this tournament or whatever it is. Like that's kind of what I'm expecting this week. I think he's going to be a good performer. That's just more of the safety markets and the upside we're talking about. So almost by default there, I will take Fitzpatrick, who does have positive trajectory in my model for upside, which McIntyre does also, if we want to get technical there. But Fitzpatrick has at least shown in major championship sort of pedigree golf that he can take down a tournament. So not knowing exactly how this course is going to play and some of the results at least trending in a better direction for him, I'll take Fitzpatrick.
Wanted to note that Nick Dunlap last week at the FedEx St. Jude Championship gained 1.68 true strokes per round on approach, which was his best result over an average of 4 rounds in a tournament with his irons in his career. So showing some more upside perhaps than we've seen before. I would take Dunlap just because there's a little bit of an unknown there. And also, by the way, the only golfer to win in real elevation this year at the Barracuda is Nick Dunlap. Although I don't think anybody else in that field is in the field this week. So
I think Nick was in the field. I think that's where he's been of why he wasn't on the show the last couple of weeks. He was celebrating his second place money that he got to Nick Dunlap there.
I'm intrigued by Dunlap. Very excited to see him next year. Don't know this is going to be a great fit for him. He could finish last if he finds too many hazards off the tee. His bogey rate is high. Could run into some issues, but I think there's upside there. Moving along down the board in the 80-1 range. Brian Harmon's 80-1. Benny On is 80-1. Sepp Straka's 80-1. Alex Noren is 80-1. And Denny McCarthy is also 80-1. Nick, I know you had a Harmon ticket last week. Would you pick him among this group of guys or somebody else?
Yeah, Harmon. I can't. Can I pass on the whole range?
You can.
I'll pass.
This is, I'm going to give a borderline answer here. I'm going to go with Denny McCarthy, but I'm even going to go a step further with it. I'm going to say McCarthy for DFS purposes is, as of this moment, the best leverage option that I have on the board.
Interesting.
It would probably be, I mean, if you're looking like, I think Harmon is fine too. I'm kind of out on the rest of the names that you mentioned, not necessarily looking to place outrights, but McCarthy had certain variables inside of my model that propelled him up much further than a typical Denny McCarthy profile does for me.
I faded McCarthy last week, and he had his most feet of putts hold in his entire PGA Tour career on Friday. So I'm not salty about that at all. Moving along to the next range, we have somebody who I think is really interesting. Will Zalatoris is 85-1. Keegan Bradley's 90-1. Siwoo Kim is 90-1. And Taylor Pendrith is also 90-1. Among those 4 golfers, anybody stand out to you, Nick?
Yeah, I've been talking about Will all year long, like waiting for the distance to come back off the tee. It came back a little bit last week. I don't know if I want to dive full in, but he's kind of priced to be very hazardous here. Um, I would lean him slightly over Siwoo, but Siwoo would be my honorable mention there just because I trust the viability in his swing to continue. And Siwoo obviously hasn't been injured in a long time, but I do like that Will Zalatoris kind of popped last week. He's making putts. It looks goofy with that broomstick, but he did it last week. I know it's been a complete mixed bag all season long. But if he's getting his distance back, and it seems like that has consistently been the case over the past 2 months, I'm okay with it. I'd ride the talent of Will Zalatoris. A guy that gets hot gets very hot.
Mm-hmm.
I have so Will Zalatoris the past give or take 3 months here hasn't really been better than T40 something on the leaderboard. And I have faded him, I don't know, 10 to 12 times, and I'm 0 for whatever the number actually is. I somehow find a way to lose every single fade against Zalatoris as he doesn't even produce on the leaderboard. The most glaring one is when I took Adam Scott a handful of weeks ago in a round one matchup where Zalatoris beats Adam Scott by, I don't know, it was like 12 or 13 strokes and then proceeds to never be within like 5 strokes on any other given day. I think we finally have reached the point with Zalatoris where I've seen enough for upside markets. I'm willing to take a chance on him here. He's 6th in my model when looking at comp courses of how I weight it. He was 5th for similar elevation courses. If we believe the game is returning, this price is too high of what we have it here. So I'm kind of fine closing my eyes and hoping for the best with him here.
Yeah, looking at Willie Z's recent results. So, Spencer, you mentioned in his prior 11 results before last week, no top 40 finishes. Last week, T12 at the FedEx St. Jude Championship. He was in the first half of the season, we'll say, up till the Wells Fargo Championship at Quail Hollow. He was no more than 7 yards above the average driving distance in a field that week, except for one time at the Sony Open, which is a club down course. So we'll throw it out. He also missed the cut. So only a 2-round sample size. He has consistently been gaining on the field recently, with the exception of the Scottish Open and the Open, which you can maybe throw out because he missed the cut at the Open and he only played 2 rounds. And there's a lot of wind involved, club down course as well. So we'll kind of throw that out. But he's consistently been, call it around an average of 7.5 yards over the field average. And then last week, 13.5 yards above the field average in driving distance. So clearly there's a little bit more distance there. I called a few of his tournaments and I've seen a little bit more of that side bend, which is a little bit concerning for the long-term health of the back, but that's also how he generates power as a more slender guy. Yeah. So that's his swing. For better or for worse, he could withdraw because he gets stuck in the rough and it hurts his back. And we know that he did withdraw earlier in the summer. That withdrawal came at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. That was the tournament I was calling. And so I think there's some upside there and we finally gotten to the point where the number might be longer than it should be when we've been fading him for most of the season. So I think he's a really interesting golfer to watch this week.
Yeah.
Moving along, a name that I was wondering if anybody would bring up this week, Max Homa, is 110 to 1. He was dead last week in Memphis by a mile. He's 110 to 1. Thomas Dietrich, a golfer whose strength is his driver, is 100 to 1. I thought that was intriguing. And then Tom Hoge and Eric Cole, some guys who can throw some darts, are also 110 to 1. Nick, if you had to bet outright on one of those 4 golfers, Dietrich, Homa, Hoge, or Cole, which one would it be?
I know Spencer's answer, so I'm going to go with Thomas Dietrich. I'm going to go with the driver.
Yeah, Cole. I mean, Cole is the route that I did end up going there when that decision was forced upon me. I mean, outside of that, I don't know if I have a ton of interest. Like if Homa looks broken at this point, like it's just hard to get fully behind. Like he's almost every single week. There's certain players, and Oberg would be one of these examples where he's underachieving, but he's actually striking the ball well. Where you look at Homa and he's kind of achieving the exact success that he should be achieving based off of the lack of production that he's putting together from a ball striking perspective. So, until we see a change here, and I don't know what is going on with him, my model likes him from an upside market outlook. And the long-term data is going to look better than the short-term data. And that's what my model sees, but I find it very hard to stomach going in any direction near him.
You mentioned Homa's ball striking struggles. In the last 3 tournaments, he's lost on a per round basis at least 3/4 of a shot on approach each of the 3 tournaments. And last season, he did that 1 time, and he's done it 3 out of the last 3 times this week. And early before that, this season, he did not do it a single time, actually. So it's really been a rough run of a couple weeks for Max Homa, and we'll see if he can figure it out. Of course, with the FedEx Cup playoffs ending next week, the Procore Championship, which is the old Fortinet where Homa won 2 years in a row, we'll see. I would assume he's going to be in that field in Napa. Have no idea what the number would be on him in that week, with him potentially playing against a lesser field at a place where he's won. So that's something interesting to keep in mind if he doesn't play well over the next couple weeks. All right, gentlemen, there are only a handful of other golfers on the board as our rapid fire makes it through everyone in the field. Max Grazerman's 110-1. Austin Eckroat's 110-1. Cam Davis is 120. Adam Hadwin is 140. Chris Kirk is 160. JT Poston is 175. Steven Yeager is 185. And Matthew Pavon is 225-1. So Grazerman, Eckroat, Davis, Hadwin, Kirk, Poston, Yeager, and Pavon. That's the rest of the board at Bet365. We made it all the way through. Nick, if you had to choose one of those guys, who would you pick?
I'm going to ride the hot hand in the recent form of Austin Eckroat.
All right. He likes the Oklahoma State Cowboy. Spencer, which one of those gentlemen would you choose in the outright market?
I think Eckroat's probably the safest choice of that group. I'm going to go from just the pure volatility of either an Adam Hadwin or a JT Poston. I've talked a lot about Hadwin on this show, so I guess I'll double down one last time with him and say Adam Hadwin.
I thought you were going to go a different way when you said the volatility, because Matthew Pavon, the Frenchman, you could argue is the Ricky Bobby of the PGA Tour. He's either first or he's last. You wouldn't think, given his profile and his lack of length off the tee, that he'd be a great fit at Torrey Pines, but he won there, and he's had quite a few top 5 finishes. 3rd at the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am, where if they played another round, who knows what would have happened. 5th at the U.S. Open as well. At 225-1, I would take Pavon among those options. But at the end of Thursday, he might not, or at the end of the turn, he might not even be in the tournament. So who knows? All right, gentlemen, we got just a couple minutes left. Where can we find your work this week? Starting with you, Nick.
Links and locks here at Action Network and the Best Bets page at Action Network, and potentially Better Golf Pod with Spencer we got to talk about. I don't know how much to break down the DFS board, but we'll be in touch here as we get ready for the off season and then get ready for the new season coming up here. So I know it's been a busy end of the season, but yeah, I appreciate it. It was a great golf season. Excited to talk some East Lake here coming up, but really excited to watch this one on TV. Like I said earlier, I don't know why I'm so giddy about that, but the backdrop should be fantastic.
It should be awesome. Also wanted to note, Golf Digest did a really sweet flyover of all 18 holes with Jim Nantz narrating it. It's on YouTube. It's like 12, 15 minutes. Check it out if you really want to get in the weeds and check out the golf course. Spencer, where can we find your work this week?
Really quickly, Nick's answer reminds me of when Nick came to Vegas. Nick asked me what are some things that, couldn't be done in Vegas. What do I like to do? And I told him I like looking around of the decor of the hotels and all the casinos. And I think Nick almost fell out of his seat that was the answer that was given. So the backdrop of what you're going to see on television is Nick's golf version of what he is excited about this week. But you can find me on Twitter at @TOffSports. You can get any of my in-tournament work over here at Action Network. And then you can get my model over at Rotoballer.
Awesome. You can find me on Twitter or X at RobertoA213. Very excited for this week's tournament. And I'll be on PGA Tour Live's coverage of the Tour Championship next week on ESPN Plus. So more information on next week's show when I figure out what stream I'll be on and who I'll be working with and everything. So very excited for that. Big thanks to everybody who makes this podcast possible. Big thanks to all the fans for supporting us. Tell a friend, tell an enemy. Be sure to check out all the other Action Network podcasts. We're kicking into gear with the NFL, college football. First college football Saturday is this week. I know Colin Wilson and Stuckey have you covered with everything you wanted to know there. They've got a bunch of great previews already on the site, and you can find their podcast coming out every Thursday night, I believe. So be sure to check that out. As always, a big thanks to all of the people who make this podcast possible. especially our producers, Matt Mitchell, David Payne, and Noah Niederhofer, who gets us across the finish line every single week. Very excited for this week's BMW Championship, one of my favorite tournaments on the PGA Tour with the great rotation of courses. Very excited for Castle Pines, and hopefully one of our guys crossing the finish line in first place once again this week. So for Spencer and Nick and me, big thanks to everybody for listening or watching if you're on YouTube this week, and we'll catch you guys next week in Atlanta for the Tour Championship preview.